Hello everyone. Before I get to the other stories I have lined up for your entertainment, I'd like to take a moment to talk with all of you and come clean about something. Something that has been weighing on my soul pretty heavily for a while. I've always been pretty open and transparent with my audience, so it only feels right to share this part of my journey with you. After all, the first step to recovery is acceptance. So I want to tell you all about my addiction to frozen pizzas. I know that it sounds silly, but addiction can creep up on you. It takes all different shapes and sizes. Before you know it, you're repeating patterns daily. Your brain goes on autopilot, and you don't notice the routine anymore. That's how it got for me. It started as a quick, cheap, and easy way to feed myself for a night. I knew what havoc they wreak on a body, but when I was just starting out, $2.50 for a day's meal. Sign me up. I would buy a couple and keep them in a freezer for whenever I didn't feel like making actual food. It's possible that over time they just became a sort of comfort for me. Something that was always there. Something I didn't really have to think about. I would buy different brands. Switch it up a little bit. Red Baron, Jack's, and if I felt like spoiling myself, the occasional stuffed crust DiGiorno. Though it wasn't that long ago that I realized just how bad things had gotten for me. Just how deep in the hole I was when it came to these frozen frisbees. One night while editing a video, I think it was Scary Wendigo Stories, I had one of those pizzas heating up in the oven. As I was recording, I could smell the familiar smell of baking preservatives and imitation cheese filling up my room. I had to keep taking breaks while recording as my mouth kept becoming saturated with saliva. My body was so excited for the pizza. I wasn't even consciously aware that my fingers were trembling until I looked down at them, fingernails tapping against my desk. I managed to finish the recording just as the oven timer went off. After saving the audio file, I rushed over to the oven and pried it open. A waft of warm air smacked against my face, and I reached in to grab the pizza. My hand quickly retreated when it felt the hot steel of the oven rack. My mind had gone blank, and I had reached in. No gloves, no tools, not even a plate to put it on. The burn shocked the rational part of my brain back to place. I turned around and grabbed a plate and spatula. I could already see that the part that had touched the hot metal was starting to rise. It was going to cause an annoying blister. But I didn't have time to worry about that. My stomach was bubbling, demanding something to eat. Pulling the fresh pizza out of the oven and placing it on the counter, I grabbed a slicer and got it ready. It was still pretty hot as the first slice dripped into my mouth. A tingling sensation ran over my tongue. The heat was something I could ignore, though. I couldn't wait a moment longer to enjoy the pizza. Didn't want a moment of gooey cheese and roasted sauce to go to waste. I could feel a blanket of comfort wrapping around me the more I ate. I continued until the last bite, the final crispy bit of crust being destroyed by my teeth. It was so good, and before I knew it, I was reaching for another box. I don't even remember walking to the freezer to get it. I was finishing the pizza, and suddenly my hand was plunging into frigid air, grasping another box. Coming to my senses, I pulled my hand away, though the cool air did feel nice on my burn. Closing the freezer door, I thought about how absurd it would be to eat two of them, one after the other. Even joked to myself that I had a problem. If I only knew. Grabbing the empty box for the pizza I had just eaten, I pushed it into the trash. I looked down for a moment at the collection of similarly colored boxes, a graveyard of old homes. The next day I was pretty busy and ended up ordering out. I don't remember what I got though. I just remember thinking about the pile of boxes and feeling disgusted with myself, so I convinced myself to eat something different. As I was editing the video and eating my food though, I couldn't help but notice how dissatisfied my body seemed to be with it. The trembling in my hands returned and continued even after finishing my food. Worse than that, I had ordered a pretty substantial amount of food, but I didn't feel full at all. Felt like I hadn't eaten a bite, as if my body was rejecting the food. Looking back at my kitchen, I thought about heating up another pizza. Hell, a part of me was so hungry I considered not heating it. Somehow I resisted the urge, decided that my body was just going to have to live with what it had, and I finished up the video. Even as I laid down to sleep, my tummy was rumbling, but I did my best to ignore it, shut my eyes, and descend into dreams. I can't say how long I was out for. All I know is that I woke up with a calming scent filling my nose. Opening my eyes, I was surprised to see I was staring at my oven. I was sitting on the floor with my back against the wall. I could see a faint amber glow coming through the oven's viewing panel. Inside was a frozen pizza just cooking away. My whole body was trembling, like a rabid dog trying to get off its leash to chase a bunny. It was like 4 a.m. and my body, beyond my will, had somehow started cooking a pizza. The timer on the oven was getting closer to 0, and I could feel my fingers reaching out. I couldn't tell if I was in control of them or not, but soon after my right arm lifted as if being dragged along by my fingers. The smell of the cooking pizza was smoky. It smelled like it had been in for too long or the temperature was too high. Regardless, I could hear a shrill beep come from the oven that my body treated like a chorus of angels. Rising from my sitting position, I pulled the door open. Heat and built-up smoke rushed off and blocked my vision. My body didn't care though. I could feel the painful sting of piping hot metal and searing sauce as my hand gripped the pizza inside. There was no stopping me. I screamed in my head to stop, but my body continued, a puppet to carnal desires. Fingertips sending nerve endings into howling agony as I pulled the pizza free from the oven. The disc slapped onto the kitchen counter. I could see the surface of the pizza. What was usually a golden brown layer of gooey cheese had become dark and crispy. My hands grabbed the pizza, and like I was trying to rip a phone book, I tore it in half. Bits of ruined dough tried to remain intact, but it was useless. My fingers pressed almost the entire half into my mouth. I could feel every crevice of my mouth completely overwhelmed with heat. I could have put volcanic rocks in my mouth and not know the difference. Still, I kept chewing. I thought my tongue would fall off with how much the pain concentrated on it. As I chewed, my whole body started heating up, and another familiar taste became present in my mouth. The taste of iron. The heat was so severe that it had spilt over the tissue in my mouth, and my blood was mixing with the tomato sauce. I could hardly even breathe with that much food in my mouth, only bits of it being swallowed at a time. Was it sauce, or my blood that dripped out of my mouth and onto the floor as I chewed? Thick globs of crimson liquid painting my chin. Smoke painted my throat every time I swallowed more of the burning mess. My nostrils filled with the sensation of fire. I wanted to stop, to move away from it, but my body was taking its actions. I had no say. Once the first half of pizza had made it down my throat, I could even feel the heat in my stomach. My hands reached for the other half. For a moment, though, my head turned to show me that the oven was still on, still cooking a second pizza like my body wanted to know it wasn't nearly over yet. Before the second half was shoved in my mouth, all I could taste was blood. I tried to spit it out, but when I did, my head moved and vicious representation of pain landed on the pizza. Like it was hot sauce or something. Then, the next half entered my mouth. I thought, or rather hoped, that my nerves would be fried by the previous intrusion, but the opposite was true. Since my mouth had been split open in several places, it rang out in pain as I stretched open my jaw and placed the pizza in. The second half was somehow hotter than the last, and magma sauce entered my open wounds. My eyes started to roll into my back of my head, and I thought about passing out. If it wasn't for the second still cooking pizza, I might have just let myself drop to the tiled floor there and then. I tried to fight through it though. As much as I wanted to give up, as fast as my heart was beating, I didn't want to completely surrender control to the addiction my body built up to these frozen pizzas. With tears streaming down my face, heat rolling over my eyes, I suffered through the pain until my jaw felt sore. Eating the second piece felt like it took forever, but more and more pieces disappeared into the mass building in my stomach. With the final bits left, I exhaled a heavy breath, feeling like I might be able to spit pure fire out. Ragged and exasperated breaths came and went. I thought my body was giving me a moment to rest. I was thankful. I was also wrong. It was waiting, making me look at the second pizza in the oven cook until it was consumed by fire. Hell rested in my oven as the pizza was wrapped in flames, and that's when my body started moving towards it. A prisoner in my own meat, I couldn't do anything to stop my hands from gripping the flaming pizza. Still, on fire, I pulled the pizza free from the flames, setting it on top of the stove where it would be away from the wooden cabinets. I waited for my arms to tear the pizza in half like the last one. I was horrified when my jaw dropped. Muscles around my mouth stretched, and I could feel it tearing beneath my skin. And before I could come to terms, my jaw popped. Like a snake, I had unhinged my jaw, presumably so I could eat the burning pizza whole. Fingers burning from licking flames pulled the pizza closer to the edge, and my face started lowering to it. The thing was burnt to a crisp. I couldn't see any bit of it that even closely resembled the pizzas I used to eat. I could feel the rising intensity of the flames as my face got lower. There was no way I was letting that pizza into my body. Thankfully, my body hadn't considered my smoke detector, and I heard a heavenly ring go off as the smoke had finally triggered it. I just had to let it go long enough. With a renewed hope, I tried to fight against my body, the skin on my finger turning a shade similar to the burned pizzas. I couldn't even feel them anymore. The nerves had been fried. Or I was going into shock. It felt like weights were placed on my back as I fought against my body's attempt to devour the pizza. In one last-ditch effort, I stopped fighting back and slammed my face down, submerging the side of my head into the flames and onto the pizza. I know it would hurt. Thought it was better than whatever the pizza would do to my insides. I just didn't know it would hurt that much. Fire filled my lungs as I screamed in reaction. My voice caused the fire to swirl, and I could see waves of heat dancing around as the skin on my face seemed to start melting. I can't possibly describe the completely unyielding agony that ran over me. A great shuddering pilfered my body as I tried to lift my face from the pizza. Horror. It was sheer horror when I felt bits of my skin clinging to the pizza. I could barely see it in my peripherals, the way my skin hung down. It looked just like those commercials for pizza places. When they take a slice away from the pie and there are those tendrils of cheese still hanging on. My skin was those tendrils. I could see red spilling down them and running into the burnt pizza like an offering. I was becoming weak. I felt my left eye starting to slide like it was being pulled along with the skin. Fighting against the urge to black out, still, I had to suffer through the sick notion that I was beginning to resemble the pizzas I had gotten hooked on. Gooey strings of flesh, running pockets of red sauce. Even my skin had become singed dark in various spots. Just as I felt I might lose the battle, just as the pain became the only thing taking space in my mind, I saw lights. Red and blue lights. I figured then it would be okay to pass out. I woke up several hours later laying in a hospital bed. The doctor told me that the extent of damage was severe. If he wasn't directly told it was due to a fire, he would have assumed I was attacked by a bear. My skin was torn and blistering. My mouth was filled with frothing blood. Fingers and face charred black. They said they did everything they could, but I was ultimately going to need some cosmetic surgery. I joked that it was fine. I could pay for it. I'm pretty famous on YouTube. I jested. He retorted by saying he hoped I wasn't a beauty blogger. As I could still feel the remnants of burning that covered me despite all the pain pills they gave me, he handed me a mirror. I couldn't help but laugh when I saw my reflection. There was no way to ignore the synchronicity as I looked at my face, all wrapped up in white bandages. We scheduled times for me to come back so they could start repairing the damaged skin, but other than that, they did all they could to secure my health, and I was sent home. It was odd going back, looking at the smoke stain above my ceiling. And if I wasn't addicted to those pizzas, I am now. Every time I feel my hands start to shake, or my stomach starts spouting demands, I throw a frozen disc into the oven. My body had sent its message, and I wasn't about to ignore it. Anyways, thanks for listening to me. Letting me get this all out. Feels good to say it out loud. I won't keep you any longer, though. We both know what you're really here for, so here's the first story for tonight. I hope you enjoy it. And as always, I hope you all have a great night. I guess before the story even starts, I should introduce myself. My name is Danny Hager. I used to love exploring abandoned buildings with my friends, Stacy, Johnny, and Tyler. Well, used to is kind of a strong way to put it, but nonetheless, it's the best way I know how. My friends and I basically grew up together, and we're friends since the 3rd grade. Abandoned buildings and places rumored to be haunted always intrigued us ever since we watched videos on the internet. I always used to say to my friends, hey, I think it would be cool if we could explore places like those for ourselves. But where we lived, there wasn't many abandoned or haunted places to explore, so we really didn't get to. We all graduated high school around the same time, and we shared a college dorm in the town of Smethport, Wisconsin, which was about 3 or 4 miles outside of our old town of Bakersfield. Exploring abandoned and haunted buildings was actually pretty fun for a while. We would even find things we wanted that were cool enough to take for souvenirs. There would even be times when we would legitimately get frightened out of haunted places and the next day laugh about it. We were having the time of our lives. One day, however, that all changed when Johnny came running into our dorm with an extremely huge grin on his face. Johnny then proceeded to shove his phone into Stacy, Tyler, and I's faces. I may have found the perfect place for us to explore, Johnny said with pure excitement. What are you talking about, John? Stacy and Tyler asked in unison. Me being a little skeptical, I took Johnny's phone and proceeded to read aloud the news article that he had found. Collinsworth Insane Asylum that was shut down in 1956 is the supposed new hotspot for horror seekers and ghost hunters alike. The details of the article were brief. It was shut down because of allegations of inhumane research testing and treatments that were spreading like wildfire. And finally, the government saw that they were true and cut the facility's funding, and within a year, they were shut down for good. Sounds too good to be true, said Stacy. Tyler and I nodded our heads in agreement, but Danny's always said that we should explore abandoned and haunted places. Well, this place sounds like an amazing combination of both. I even took the liberty of looking this place up. He pulled out a printed image of the place, and from the looks of it, it was huge. "How far away is it from here?" Tyler asked. Johnny thought for a moment. "It's only about 10 miles from here. I know because I drove by there when you three went to Stacy's parents' new house to help them move in. It looks way creepier in person. I even heard it has a graveyard with unmarked graves." He said the last part as creepily as he could. I also thought it would be even cooler if we were to spend the entire night there as well, Johnny added. We looked at each other for a moment. Finally, after thinking it over for a couple minutes, we agreed to go with Johnny that weekend. On the days before the big adventure we planned, we went to our local supermarket for a few things: flashlights, lanterns, batteries, snacks, and some sleeping bags. Then the day finally arrived and we loaded up the van with all our gear and we set off. I checked the time as we pulled out of the university parking lot and saw that it was exactly 7:30 p.m. and the sun was already setting. By the time we got there, it was 9 o'clock. The sun had gone down and it got dark rather quickly. For the life of me, I don't know why we left the van at the beginning of the asylum's driveway, but I guess Johnny wanted to amp up the creep factor, which worked, by the way, but we walked down the dark entranceway that was lined with big oak trees on either side, blocking out the moon. As we expected, and like Johnny said, it was huge. We walked up towards the giant iron gate that was slightly ajar and creaked and groaned as it slowly swung back and forth. "I don't think we should do this," Tyler said quietly. Stacy shook her head in agreement but managed to choke out, "But we're already here. It would have been a waste of fuel to come here. Look at the building. Only to call it quits and go home." In hindsight, I wish we had listened to Tyler. We all picked up our things and with a loud and terrifying creak, we opened the huge iron gate and made our way to the front of the asylum. The first thing that kind of caught me off guard was that the front doors were knocked clean off their hinges and laid on the floor, as if someone or something big slammed through them. We turned on our flashlights, and we all slowly walked inside the dark room. I shone my flashlight around and noticed we were standing in the reception area of the asylum. The walls were white in color, with a peeling red line in the middle. We should find somewhere to bunker down for the night before we start our exploration. Stacy said. We all agreed to use the medication office on the second floor, so we all started towards the stairs and started to climb. After climbing 2 flights of steps, we finally made it to the second floor and made our way inside the medicine office. We then laid our sleeping bags on the floor in a circle, lit the lantern, and placed it in the middle of the floor. "So where do you think we should explore in this place first?" Johnny asked. We all shrugged our shoulders and asked Johnny if he had a map. He pulled it out and we looked it over and decided to just go ahead and explore the entire facility. After all, the night was waning and we wanted to see as much as we could before we had to leave in the morning. So we agreed and we set off. It was about 11 p.m. when we got to the main holding cells of the insane people. Other than the lights of our flashlights, it was pitch black and quiet as could be in there besides our breathing. We explored that building from top to bottom. Well, almost the bottom, with Johnny disappearing and jumping out at us, scaring the living shit out of us. We'd laugh it off. Hell, we even tried to get him back a few times, but it never really worked. We even heard weird and spooky sounds. Even though they frightened us, we tried to debunk them as wind or things like that. I wish that were the case. I even wished I could say that this exploration went without a hitch, but I'd be lying if I said that it didn't. When we all got to the basement level of the asylum, which is where the complicated systems of winding tunnels were, I immediately felt as if someone or something was watching the 4 of us and didn't want us there. Stacy must have picked up on that as well as she started to shiver. I think we should go back to our sleeping area and start getting some rest before we have to drive another 10 miles back to our dorm. Johnny just huffed. Oh, come on, you three. Stop being such babies. I want to see where these tunnels go and find out what's in these different rooms. He then left. I even suggest that we split into teams of 2. I'll go with Tyler. And Stacy, you and Danny go together. Tyler and I'll go right. And you two will go straight. Stacy, Tyler, and I dreaded the idea of splitting off. I could feel the presence of something that didn't feel quite right. Johnny, you're absolutely nuts. You've watched countless horror movies with us to know that it's a fucking horrible idea to split up, even into teams of 2. What if there's something unnatural and evil down here that wants to eat us? What if there's a killer? What if... Stacy was cut off by Johnny's uproarious laughter. Really, Stacy? Are you serious? Those movies are fake as fuck and you know it. There's nothing down here but us. You'll be fine. You're not gonna get killed or eaten. Quit being a little bitch. And with that, Tyler and Johnny disappeared into a tunnel to our right, while Stacy and I went down the tunnel in front of us. Stacy and I walked for what felt like an eternity. I checked my watch. It was 3 o'clock when I heard a clang as I walked into a big steel door. I rubbed my head as I shined my flashlight on the door. There was a placard above the door that read, Morgue. And spray painted on the door was the words, Warning, stay out. I looked at Stacy, who was still shaking slightly. I reached my hand towards the handle and turned it with ease, opening the door. The smell of death and sharp smell of blood filled our nostrils. I shined my flashlight into the room and almost vomited. Bodies and blood were everywhere and looked relatively fresh. Some of the bodies were mutilated so badly that their blood and entrails were scattered all over the floor, walls, and ceiling. I shined my light over to the corner of the room where the freezers were. Hunched over in the corner, tearing into one of the many fresh corpses was something that looked like a tall man, about 7 to 8 feet tall, wearing a deer's skull. Only it wasn't. The jaws of the skull were moving while it devoured the corpse's flesh. I tried to move, but I couldn't. This thing stopped, and suddenly, with movement too quick for anything natural to move, it stared directly at Stacy and I, its teeth covered in bright crimson gore of its victims. Then with a loud, terrifying shriek, it suddenly jumped up and charged at us. I quickly closed the door as fast as I could, grabbed Stacy's arm and ran down the dark tunnel, listening to the steel door being knocked clean off its hinges, followed by another piercing roar and thunderous footsteps as the thing chased after us. After running for what seemed like hours, we finally ran into Johnny and Tyler, who were exploring the asylum's hospital wing just off of the tunnel they were in. "We have to get out of here now," Stacy screamed. I turned to her and covered her mouth with my hand. "You need to be quiet, or else that thing will attack us and we'll never get out of here." Johnny looked confused. "What the fuck has you two so riled up?" I told him about the morgue, the fresh corpses with their blood and entrails strewn around the room like twisted piñatas. I then proceeded to tell him about the monster that chased us. Johnny looked as though he understood. Then he began to laugh loudly. "You're just trying to scare me back, right? I'm gonna walk outside this door and prove to you that your so-called monster isn't real." Stacy and I desperately tried to warn him to stay in the room, but to no avail. He stepped out into the hall and shined his light all around. We hid in the old lockers when we heard that thing give off that damn shriek. The monster tackled Johnny to the floor as we watched helplessly inside the lockers as it tore through his stomach with its claws, pulling out Johnny's entrails. Johnny screamed in agony as the thing was tearing him apart, eating what it could. Poor Tyler was next to go. Tyler tried to run from the room, but his efforts were quickly shattered as the monster lunged at him, ripping his head from his shoulders like a sickening ripping sound. As I saw that it was distracted, I told Stacy that we were going to try and make a run for the exit. We quickly got out of the lockers and we ran past the beast. and ran for our lives down the dark corridors. As we ran, we could hear that the thing was no longer distracted with its latest meal. It was now chasing us down once again. Every door me and Stacy ran across during our escape attempt, we would slam shut behind us, only to hear them get busted down. We ran up the flights of stairs as fast as we could until we finally made it to the first floor we entered the building from. Stacy and I slammed the stairwell doors shut behind us and ran through the non-existent front doors and through the gate. Stacy and I made it halfway down the driveway when Stacy stopped. I stopped and turned to see what she was doing. "Run, Danny. Run!" She screamed, but before I could say anything, I heard the shriek again as the beast quickly made its way to her and immediately started to tear her apart. I ran as fast as I could, her devastating screams echoing behind me. When I got to the van, I started it and immediately floored it as fast as I could back to the university. The next day, everyone was wondering where Stacy, Tyler, and Johnny went. I lied and told them I didn't know where they had gone. One day while I was studying for the upcoming exams, a news bulletin came on saying that numerous bodies were found inside the asylum. Most were the ones inside the morgue. My friends' bodies were all found inside the hospital wing where we were hiding. After seeing them all dead again, filled me and continues to fill me with sadness. Especially Stacy. I wish I could have helped her, even though if it weren't for her sacrifice, I'd be dead along with them. But to anyone who's reading this, I ask that you please stay the fuck away from Collinsworth Insane Asylum. There is an evil presence that lurks there, and it will stop at nothing until you or anyone else you're with is dead. I survived because of Stacy's sacrifice. If you do decide to go there to see for yourself, don't say I didn't warn you. The work order said Domenia Place. Domenia is an odd, old neighborhood. It's a combination of well-maintained mansions from the 1800s, abandoned single-family homes from the 1900s, and overpriced condos built within the last 10 years. The building I pulled up to was truly an overwhelming display of wealth. It was built in the 1800s when an old German family struck it rich selling booze to the huddled masses in the New World. 3 stories, stonework everywhere, and the basement had full-size windows poking up out of the ground. The Metzgers wanted everyone to know that they were doing well, so they built a home almost as big as an IKEA. The mansion had seen more than its fair share of tragedies. A kidnapping and a string of suicides in the early 1900s had people saying the old house was cursed. But even with all the sadness associated with the mansion, it was a local favorite for date nights. A few years back, the family that owns the house converted a large section of the first floor into a restaurant. They also allowed tours of the upper floors on weekends. So this wasn't my first time at the mansion. A couple of years ago, my wife Katie signed us up for one of the romantic ghost tours for our anniversary. We spent 45 minutes walking up the upstairs halls, learning the tragic story of Arthur and Elle Metzger. We learned 3 things in that 45 minutes. Ellie Metzger was kidnapped but escaped. Arthur Metzger drowned in the bathtub just before Ellie returned, and Ellie shot herself a week later. Then we had pasta in the restaurant. Katie thought the night was romantic, and I liked my baked potato. I parked my van in the restaurant parking and took one more look at the work order. It said the building was having water pressure issues, which were not surprising given the weather. Once the temperature hits freezing, half the houses in the city end up with broken pipes. "Are you the plumber?" I looked up at the large house, but didn't see anyone. "Over here, to your left." A slight woman with brown hair and a long wool coat waved me over as she bounced up and down on her toes, trying to stay warm. I'm Miss Wright. I'd shake your hand, but it's too cold for that. Let's go inside. I laughed and she led me around to the side entrance. I'm Gary. The office should have sent you a text message with my picture. Smartphones, she said with wide eyes. What interesting little devices those are. I didn't know what to say to that, so I got straight to business. The ticket said you were having some trouble with water pressure. Have you noticed any leaks? I haven't noticed any yet, but I haven't been searching for them either. We have an event tonight, and so much needs to be done before the restaurant opens. Well, I can see if I can get this straightened out for you. I didn't see the water meter when I drove in. Do you happen to know where the main water line is? It's behind the carriage house. I'll get to it then. If you need anything, just yell. I'll hear you, she said. Then Ellie glided down the hall, muttering to herself about napkins and gift bags. First, I checked the water pressure. There wasn't any. Then, I hustled behind the carriage house and found the meter. Water was flowing, which meant that there was a significant break. I shut everything down and started looking for water damage. I checked the yard, the carriage house, and eventually found my way back inside the main building. I figured that since there wasn't any water pouring down the stairs, the break must have been in the basement. I looked all around the first floor for access to the basement and was about to call for Miss Wright when I heard, "Can I help you, Gary?" from just behind my right ear. I jumped and squealed a little, which I felt was a perfectly acceptable response to have in a mansion that gives ghost tours. I saw you walk past the library and it looked like you were searching for something, she said with a grin. I'm looking for the basement. With the amount of water that went through there, should be a swimming pool somewhere, but I haven't found it yet. This way to the cellar, she said and led me through the restaurant to a paneled wall that disguised the door. The basement was a huge open space filled with all manner of detritus. Barrels, old furniture, and racks of wine bottles created islands in a sea of emptiness. The one thing I was trying to find wasn't there. The whole space was bone dry. With Miss Wright's help, I found where the water line entered the mansion. The pipes pierced the top of a bricked-up, painted-over archway. I turned to Miss Wright. Bet you the leak's in there, I said, gesturing to the wall. You wouldn't happen to know how to get behind that arch? Her mouth lit with a mischievous smile. I do, she said. But it's kind of creepy, and there is a ladder. I followed as Miss Wright marched us out of the basement towards the carriage house. The closer we got to the building, the more excited Miss Wright seemed. She was absolutely bubbly by the time we crossed the threshold of the carriage house. Without any hesitation, she walked to the back corner of the building and pulled up a trapdoor. These are the caves, she said in a ghostly sing-song. Then in her normal voice, she said, We don't allow tours down here, but the caves are without a doubt the spookiest place on the whole property. Then with a grin and a wink, the young lady disappeared down the ladder. The ladder passed through a thick layer of stone before it opened into a cave the size of a small strip mall. I swept my flashlight around. It was obvious that the space had been used for storage in years past, with shelves and grooves chiseled into the rock. It was also obvious that this area had a water leak. Miss Wright flipped an old breaker, and a line of lamps lit the ceiling with a sickly yellow glow. This is the way back to the house. We walked on as she gave me the guided tour of the cave. The Metzger family originally made its fortune selling beer. They used the caves as cold storage to keep the barrels fresh. Eventually, the house was built at the cave's mouth. Why did they block the entrance? I asked as I scanned a pipe with my flashlight. It was assumed that the caves were sealed because of Mrs. Metzger's kidnapping, but there are some that believe the whole story hasn't been told. My wife loves a good ghost story. The beam of my flashlight landed on the break in the water pipe. Found it. I pulled out my cell phone and took a picture of the hole. It was one of the strangest breaks I'd ever seen. It was almost as if the pipe had been melted. Do you think you'll be done before sunset? It'll be close. We began to walk back to the entrance under the carriage house. The good news is that I have everything in the van to fix it. The bad news is that after I fix it, I'll need to pressurize the line to make sure nothing else in the house broke. That can take some time. Before we climb out of here, I should show you the surgery. It will only take a moment, and I'm sure your wife will love the story. Miss Wright said as she walked past the ladder and pushed deeper into the cave. I was apprehensive, but Miss Wright assured me the surgery room wasn't far. After a short walk past the ladder, an inlet hid a second smaller cavern. Nestled against the cave wall stood a stout wooden lean-to. After some prompting by Miss Wright, I took pictures of the structure. I didn't touch anything. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was the first person to have seen this building in a very long time, even though Miss Wright was standing next to me. Inside, a bronze table with wooden legs was the central fixture of the room. Jars and linens sat decayed but untouched as shelves that had not seen sunlight in decades. Pans of instruments were left on tables, waiting for a surgeon that never returned. We walked back to the ladder and curiosity got the best of me. Why would anyone build a room for surgeries in a cave? I asked. That is a very good question, Gary. Miss Wright's son. Are you interested in ghost stories now? Well, I'd rather stay away from the spooky stuff. But I just can't imagine someone coming down here for help, and certainly not so many people that they built a room for it. It is a mystery, Miss Wright explained. The only Metzger in the family that we know had training as a surgeon was Arthur Metzger. Unfortunately, Arthur's journals were destroyed by his brother after his death. It's one of those things lost to time. Perhaps. Oh well. I started to climb up the ladder. That pipe isn't going to fix itself. It took a while climbing up and down that ladder, but I got the main leak fixed. Unfortunately, there was a second. I tracked it down to the bathroom just off the master suite. The bathtub had a fixture on an exterior wall, and the cold weather must have cracked in. I was a little stumped. How was I going to open that wall without ruining it? Then I noticed an odd lip in the wainscoting. With a push, it opened up to reveal a hidden cabinet. I immediately noticed the broken pipe. It had the same strange wear as the pipe in the cave. I took a picture of the pipe. Then I saw the book. The book was in fairly good condition. I pulled the book out of the cabinet and studied the cover. It was small with a yellow leather flap cover and a daffodil embossed on the binding. It looked like something my wife would put in her purse. I stood up to look for Miss Wright, and she was standing in front of me when I straightened up. I didn't squeal this time. I was too tired from climbing that cave ladder. Gary, I wanted to let you know that Mr. Metzger is on his way. You might have some questions about the plumbing, she said, and then quickly walked from the room. I called after her. I found a book next to the pipe. Put it on the table and I'll have a look at it while you finish up. I put the book on the table and got back to work. I had just finished replacing the pipe when a man yelled from downstairs. Are you up there? Just wrapping up, I called back. I slid the panel back in place, grabbed my duffel, and went to introduce myself to Mr. Metzger. We met as he crept cautiously down the side of the hallway. He was a heavy-set man in his 60s, and he looked legitimately frightened. Who are you? You're not you, are you? He said as he gestured vaguely in my direction. I'm Gary. I'm the plumber. A plumber? What a relief. He said and stood up a little straighter. What are you doing here? You had a couple busted pipes, but we got it taken care of. As soon as I turn the water back on, your kitchen should be ready to roll. Oh, we don't open tonight. It's the anniversary of Ellie Metzger's death, he said in hushed tones. Then he narrowed his eyes at me. What do you mean by we? Is someone else here? Just your assistant, Miss Wright. You are here, he bellowed at the ceiling. Then he stomped from room to room, waving his arms and screaming nonsense. The only words I could make out were, "It won't work, whatever you're planning," and "No one will ever know." I left. I had pictures of the work I did, and I could invoice him after he was done doing whatever it was he was doing. I went to turn the water on at the meter, and Miss Wright was standing next to the carriage house, bouncing up and down in her long wool coat. That Metzger guy is throwing a fit in the main house, I said. Are you going to be okay? I could stick around if you want me to. Miss Wright stopped bouncing, and for just a moment she looked like she'd won. It was the same look my grandma used to give me right before she cleaned me out playing gin rummy. You don't have to worry about me, Gary. I'm about to leave. You did a great job today. Thanks. I'm glad I was able to get it straightened out for you. Miss Wright laughed and walked towards the parking lot. Good night, Gary. Say hi to your wife from me. When Miss Wright said, say hi to your wife from me, I didn't think much about it. It wasn't until I was home that I knew what she meant. I was looking for a pen in my duffel when I discovered the book. The book was small with a yellow leather flap cover and a daffodil embossed on the binding. My wife Katie convinced me that we should open the book. This meant that I looked over her shoulder while she opened the book. Ellie Wright Metzger was printed in block letters on the inside cover. Katie was excited, and I was nauseous. Katie gently flipped through the book, reading passages here and there, but I found it hard to concentrate on her words. My mind kept reliving the moments of the day. After a last passage dated March 4th, the day of Ellie Metzger's death, today's date. A typed letter was folded and tucked between the pages. Katie read the letter out loud. It was hard to hear. Afterward, my wife asked if I'd like to see the painting she found on Ellie Wright Metzger. I declined. I'm pretty sure I know what she looks like. I typed out Ellie's letter and included it below. Dear Belva, I'm writing to you for 2 reasons. 1, you are a friend, and 2, you are a lawyer. You have always been kind and circumspect regarding the lives of those within your circle, and I would value your advice in the matter of my husband's death and his foul legacy. Arthur may have been a trained surgeon, but he thought of himself as a student of natural philosophy. It was important for him to observe the natural world firsthand. He also admired that dubious Dr. Sims. I have learned that Arthur perfected his trade on vagabonds in the caves under the carriage house. He has an operating room, and I have been a patient in it. I should start from the beginning. Arthur was such a well-respected surgeon that I did not suspect his family's fortunes had taken a major blow. Our marriage was a saving grace for the estate. I truly thought at first that he loved me, but once the marriage was finalized and the honeymoon over, he threw himself into his practice and his nurse. I confronted him with my suspicions of infidelity. He denied them. He told me I was irrational, that I was emotional. I began to doubt myself. For a short while he was attentive again, loving again, but when I learned I was pregnant, I almost wonder if they realized before I did. I don't know which one of them decided that I shouldn't keep the child. I just know that when I woke up in an operating room, anesthesia is such a fickle thing, I could hear their voices and feel the sharp pressure of them cutting out pieces of me, but I couldn't scream or beg or cry. They left me on the operating table and I listened. They were so pleased with themselves. They were going to wake me up in my bed, tell me I had been in an accident, tell me I lost a child, tell me how normal it was to not remember trauma. Somehow, I summoned the strength to stand. I stole away into the cave. They looked for me, and every time I heard a voice, I pushed myself deeper into the dark. It was days, but I found my way into the city sewer, then out. Fever was burning through me by then. It didn't feel like there was much time left. I don't remember why I decided to return to the mansion. I walked through the side door. I was quiet. No one heard me as I tiptoed up the stairs and into our suite. He was soaking in the bathtub with the wash rag draped over his forehead when I dosed him with his own ether. I watched him sink into the water before I rang for the servants. Everything was so busy after that. But I did have the presence of mind to tell Gerald, our butler, that Arthur's nurse had kidnapped me. I thought I was dying. Hell hath no fury. Isn't that the phrase? Finally, I took some time to rest, but healing has been slow, and I have had bouts of fever. However, during my convalescence, I confiscated Arthur's journals. He wrote everything down. Every experiment Arthur performed is described on those pages. The callousness and injustice of it all revolt me. To think I loved that monster. I need your guidance, Belva. I believe Arthur's brother may have known of the experiments, or maybe he's just worried about his inheritance. I don't know. He has tried to call me on many times since Arthur's death. I'm just at a loss. What should I do next? Please write me soon. Yours dearly, Ellie Wright. Did you know that most networks across the country do not have a Channel 37? The reasoning behind this has to deal with the search for life outside of our universe. When the television networks were being set up, the Federal Communications Commission had designated Channel 37 in every city, state, and town to be allocated for radio telescopes. These radio telescopes searched the galaxy for signals from intelligent life. All of this information was found out after the fact, and if I had known this then, maybe my predicament could have been avoided. This all started around 4 months ago, as our typical Saturday night ritual had gotten cut short by my friend Mike. He stated he had an emergency that he needed to tend to, but we all knew it was his girlfriend being extra clingy. This killed the entire buzz of the evening, and we decided to go our separate ways. Instead of catching a ride or a taxi, part of me was thankful my apartment complex was within walking distance from the light rail. Back at my apartment complex, my intoxicated mind started manually flipping through the channels. When I had gotten to Channel 37, instead of there being static, there was an actual show playing. The scene resembled something out of a bad horror movie, as this was shot in someone's basement. There were crude Halloween decorations scattered on the walls, as well as some unidentified stains on the gray concrete blocks. A man stood in the center of the frame clad in something that was akin to tactical gear that either SWAT or Special Forces might wear. Every part of his body not only hid his physique, but gave him a sense of anonymity, as he was dressed in black from his boots to the tips of his gloved fingers. The only thing out of place was a white hockey mask that adorned his face, as the areas around his eyes had been blackened out in the shapes of triangles. A blackened, stitched smile stretched from edge to edge of the worn mask, completing his look. Looking at the camera, he greets his audience in a voice that is a cross between gravelly and smooth. My first thoughts were that his voice should be muted, but he must have a small mic hidden behind the mask. And welcome back, my maniacs. We will get back to Invasion of the Blood Farmers in a bit. For those that are tuning in for the first time, I am your host, Skullface. Welcome to the Skullface Spook Show that starts every Saturday at the stroke of midnight. So this is the part of the show that I know a lot of you love. Yes, my lovelies. It is time for the Wheel of Punishment. The camera pans to something out of a bondage's lover's dreams, as a man in his late 30s is chained to the wall. He tries to speak. However, there is a gag pushed deep into his mouth as he looks at the host with fear in his eyes. This, my lovelies, is Miguel. He is a drunkard and a womanizer, as he has repeatedly hit his wife and his kids. He is a really horrible person as he barely supports his family, and while he was out in the world, I offered him a drink. Unfortunately for him, it was laced with a drug, and he was out in a matter of minutes, so I dragged him back here to face the wheel of punishment. Muerta, can you please spin the wheel? A black and white spinner wheel fills the screen as various words are written upon it as a beautiful young woman walks into frame. She is dressed in all black from the bustier to her miniskirt, as her face is painted in a variety of colors. Her makeup resembles those sugar skulls that are meant for the Mexican Day of the Dead. As she spins the wheel, it clicks on and on as it lands on two words. Slit throats. Giving a feral grin and taking out a straight razor that was tucked in her bustier, she opens the blade and stalks up to the tied-up victim. With one quick motion, she slices through his neck as blood begins to pour from the wound, crying out in anguish. At this point, I was bored and was thinking of turning in early, so I clicked off the television and went to bed. This was an old trick that special effects guys used to use with a dull razor and a squeeze bulb filled with fake blood. One of the books in my collection was Grande Illusions, written by the great Tom Savini, and he showed how to do this trick. There wasn't a real horror movie I couldn't pick apart, either through cheap CGI or practical special effects. Next Saturday, most of my friends went to a local sci-fi con, and I had zero interest as well as funds to go. Most of the day was spent either doing chores, playing video games, or looking at weird stuff on YouTube. After getting some takeout from my favorite Chinese place, it was around 10 p.m. and part of me wondered if that channel would come back on. Turning to channel 37, there was nothing but static right now, but Skullface said it would start at midnight. Finding a movie to watch to occupy my time until the watching hour was easily settling on some early Jackie Chan flick. The movie was still going at 11:55 p.m., and not wanting to miss a second, I decided to turn back to cable. Punching in the number 37, static was still there until 2 minutes to midnight, when that was replaced by a test pattern with a typical high-pitched whine. As the stroke of midnight, the Skullface Spook Show roared to life, accompanied by Rob Zombie's Super Beast. The visuals were various horror movies ranging from classics to forgotten horrors, interspliced with shots of the host and co-host. The credits didn't run for long before the same interior showed up from the last time. Skullface stood there motionless as he seemed to look directly at me through the television. Welcome to another episode of Mayhem here at the Skullface Spook Show. I am your host, Skullface, along with the beautiful Muerta. Come and say hello, my dear. She steps from out of frame, dressed in a dark red bustier and matching short skirt. Her makeup, while it wasn't the same style, was in different colors to accentuate her look. She looked more devious in this makeup rather than beautiful, as the reds played off the ones of her outfit. Muerta looked at the camera and gave a sly smile, waving her right hand in a greeting. Folks, we have a great show for you tonight, as we are premiering a new movie with Nicolas Cage. Cage is forced to work in a rundown children's restaurant while animatronics try to murder him at every turn. Yes, folks, strap yourselves in for a wild ride as we take a journey to Willy's Wonderland. Bolting up in my seat, my mind couldn't comprehend what I had just heard. This movie hadn't even made it to the theaters yet, and somehow this low-grade show managed to snag a copy. At first my expectations were going to be it was some other ripoff or something else. However, when the film started, those suspicions were laid to rest. They were really showing this film, and without giving away any of the plot or story, this is a film that needs to be experienced. Interspersed between the movie were short segments that cut back to the studio. Skullface would give his opinion on the movie, riffing off on what happened before the last break. Other breaks would be filled in with either short horror films or cartoons that fit in that genre, recognizing some of the shorts from YouTube coming from Crypt TV, and the cartoons were pulled from Hell of a Boss. At around halfway through the film, the camera cut away to a view of the floor of the studio. The camera quickly panned up to see a young woman strapped to a hospital gurney. She was bound and gagged as she squirmed against the worn leather restraints. As the camera turned to a fixed position, Skullface stepped into frame addressing his audience. Welcome back, friends. For those of you watching for the first time, I am Skullface, and you are watching the Skullface Spook Show. We will get back to more cage carnage in a few moments, but for right now, this is the parts I know most of you sick fucks love. It is time for the Wheel of Punishment. Moving over towards the gurney like a big cat stalking his prey, Skullface looks down at his captive. This here is Alyssa. Her boyfriend Sean was loyal to her without a fault. However, she was less than faithful. So much in fact that she had gotten pregnant from another man and then lied to him about it being his. The father wasn't the most stable of people, as they were being treated for a few things including suicidal tendencies. This was enough to push him over the edge, and he shuffled off his mortal coil. Alyssa wasn't remorseful at all. In fact, she gloated about getting a hefty insurance payoff as she managed to con her way into being his beneficiary. So what fate is in store for dear Alyssa? Well, my dear psychopaths, it is time from where it's at to spin the wheel. Sauntering up to the wheel, she mimes an exaggerated pull as the wheel spins before clicking to a halt on one word. Disembowelment. Skullface produced a very sharp knife as he seemed to leer at his captive. With one quick stroke, the knife cut deep into her flesh, exposing her guts as blood sprayed the white linen laid upon the gurney. The blood looked fake, of course, and I had seen this gag done twice in Day of the Dead. What happens is there's a fake part of the body with fake guts, so when the knife cuts, it looks real. I thought it was real for a few seconds, but then laughed, repeating the mantra of Last House on the Left. It's only a movie. It's only a movie. It's only a movie. As soon as the body finished thrashing, screams of anguish muffled from the gag, the screen faded to black, and the movie started up once more. The last half of the show was only interrupted twice more. Once for some more commentary, and the last with announcements including a sneak peek at next week's episode. At that point, I was hooked. This became my weekend ritual as I tuned into the Skullface Spook Show every time. Each weekend a different movie, as some were schlocky messes like Plan 9 from Outer Space or Attack of the 50-Foot Woman. Others were either classics or modern horror like Night of the Living Dead or Color Out of Space. It would be the same thing each and every weekend as the Wheel of Punishment was spun each and every time with different victims. Robbery, murder, kidnapping, torture. Each of these crimes were dealt with in the same way. The wheel was spun, and it landed on a different punishment each and every time. Chainsaw, acid, mummification, embalming, decapitation. Part of me stopped wondering how this was being done and just went with it. I knew it was fake, and there was always an explanation to how this was done. However, the weird part was that this show wasn't available anywhere else other than Channel 37. There weren't any partial broadcasts on YouTube, Twitch, Dailymotion, or Vimeo, and not even torrents of the show existed. Google searches either brought up local festivals or makeup tutorials on how to do a Halloween makeup. There were times that I wanted to record the show, however, I would either forget or something would go wrong and it wouldn't show up on my DVR. The last episode I watched was last week, and it never made me want to tune in for another episode. At midnight, the show started as it usually did, as the movie was announced. I think it was Hellfest, and things progressed normally. That is until the Wheel of Punishment. Strapped to a wooden structure in the shape of an X was someone that I recognized almost immediately. However, before I could speak, Skullface appeared on screen. And welcome back, my lovelies. This here is Sam, and he has been a real bad boy. Sam works for a major multinational corporation, and he has been embezzling from them for at least 3 years. My jaw hung open as we had gone to the same college together and were roommates for a semester. He was a good kid, never getting into trouble or getting out of control at the various parties that we went to. How much did he steal from his workplace? $10 million. And he wasn't going to stop there, as he used this money for drugs, women, and partying. He did not care that he was stealing from other people who worked harder than he had. All he wanted was to have a good time, and now he is here. Muerta, please spin the wheel for this thief. Muerta seemed to glare at Sam as the wheel clacked by the various outcomes that would befall my friend. I even saw one of the spaces go by slowly that just read, "Go free." However, it did not land on that space. The space it did land on had only 2 words. Nail gun. Skullface's voice picked up an octave, as if he was an excited kid on Christmas morning. Oh my, this is a rare treat, folks. Usually we use maybe 2 or 3 nails to take care of our guests, but for someone this naughty, we're going to use 10. 1 for each million he had stolen. Sam's whimpering was cut by the clack of the nail gun's clip behind slammed home. Frozen in my seat, all I could do was watch Skullface come up to him and push the nail gun against his calf before announcing, 1. The nail gun jerked as Sam's muffled screams could be heard as the nail was embedded deep within his calf. Before anything else happened, I scrambled to reach the remote to turn off the television. Now flooded with adrenaline, my mind whirled with the possibilities of what just happened. Picking up my phone and calling Sam only resulted in it going straight to voicemail. This was all real. It had been all along. I was just blind to see the truth. Storming out of my apartment, I ran the 4 blocks to the police station, fueled by both fear and rage. Busting into the lobby at around 1 a.m., the front desk clerk looked at me with a mix of horror and confusion. "You have to help my friend." It's the only thing that I managed to blurt out. He motioned for me to have a seat and stated that someone would be with me shortly. After 30 minutes, part of me wanted to leave and go back home and sleep the rest of the nights off and forget this ever happened. A detective from the back offices motioned for me to follow him back. Winding through rows of cubicles that were mostly empty, we came into his office as he asked me to have a seat. He asked me what had happened. What was I going to say? That my friend was on some type of pirated broadcast torture show? They would lock me in here with the rest of the crazies, so I made up an explanation about how I had not seen my friend in days. "This isn't a joke, is it, son?" Stated in a gruff tone. "No, sir." He then pulled out a folder and spread a bunch of photos out on the table. Each of these people were victims on that accursed show. "All of these are missing person cases that we are currently working on. Do you recognize any of the people in these photos?" My eyes went wide as I had recognized some of these as victims being on that accursed show. All of these people had gone missing, that spanned from a few days ago to weeks and months. The detective saw that I was shaken. He also believed the lie that I told him that was so convincing that I believed it myself. "No, sir. I was just worried about my friend. I'm sure he'll turn up soon. Sorry to waste your time." He nodded me, giving me one of his business cards on the way out. "If you think of anything, please give me a call. There are a lot of missing persons in this part of the state." Wandering home in a daze as all of this hit me hard, I collapsed onto my bed a little before 3 a.m. The alcohol-fueled haze allowed me to drift into a deep sleep that lasted a little past noon. Not knowing what to do next, all I could think about was all those missing people. Didn't their families deserve to know what happened to them? Maybe I could decipher where this show was and assist the police in capturing these murderers. The next week vanished in a blur as part of me dreaded what would happen on Saturday at midnight. I managed to set up my laptop to my television to record everything that was seen and accumulate it as evidence against this skull face. At 11:58, I waited for the test pattern to appear, and there was nothing but static. What the hell? Was my only thought as I continued to watch nothing for a half hour, somehow waiting for this show to magically appear. It never did. Not that week, or the week after that, and for at least 2 months I had tuned into Channel 37 to watch that twisted show. There was nothing. Maybe this was all in my head and there was never a show to begin with. Sometime during the next week, I had seen a plain, padded, white envelope propped up against my front door. The envelope had no postmarks or addresses, so I thought it was something that was ordered and left at my doorstep. Opening it revealed a clear DVD case along with a disc that only had 2 words on it. Watch me. To this day, there is some part of me that wishes that I turned in that envelope to the police. I could have gone to the main office and asked where this came from, or snapped it in half and never watched it. Watching that disc has made me move from state to state and not live anywhere for more than a few weeks. Jobs have ranged from construction to line cooks, as all of my pay is in cash as I am trying to live off the grid. What was on the disc was the following. The set of the Skullface Spook Show was in the background as he stepped into frame and started talking directly to the camera. Hello there. I take it you didn't like our last episode, and while we can accept criticisms, we cannot accept you going to the police. We know you live at, as you can see by this disc that we had left at your doorstep. We will always be watching you, and waiting for you to slip up. After all, everyone knows. The camera pans to a corpse on a table that has been stitched together from various body parts. Sam's head sits on top with a nail driven right between the eyes as the arms and legs have come from various people that were executed on the show. All I could do is look in horror as the disc finished as it panned up Skullface's mask, taking up the entire frame. Snitches get stitches. I'm Tyson, a former student of Hawkins High School for Boys. From day one, a lot of us knew something was off. We just weren't able to put our finger on it. My friend Aaron said, "Feels like a murderer is here." Don't know why, but if I remember correctly from Friday the 13th, someone died and haunted the grounds. Maybe that's what is happening here. Boy, I wish that were true. I hope that he was joking. That this was a perfectly fine school. But after a few of my friends went missing, the school cracked down hard to keep us safe by writing rules. We were given a paper with said rules on them. 1. If you see a custodian with the name tag of Bob, do not interact with him. He might try to interact with you. Don't. We never have had a staff member named Bob. 2. Never look at the riverbank between the times of 10 p.m. and 4 a.m. You won't die, but you will wish you did. 3. If you open your locker and see a decapitated head, shut the locker and go to class. Do not touch the head or anything in the locker. 4. Do not open the doors at the end of the lunchroom. 5. If you see someone and they have no head, turn around and turn back. It will revert back to normal. Do not do a prolonged stare. 6. If lights start to flicker, hide under a table until they return to normal. This rule is very important. 7. The 3rd floor may appear to have 2 sets of stairs. Always take the stairs on the left. If you don't, you will be stuck on the 4th floor for the rest of your life. 8. You might see drunken humans near the forest. If they start chasing you, ignore them. We don't know whether or not they are real. It is best not to find out. Being someone who doesn't believe in ghosts, I disregarded these rules. I never believed in them until it happened. I opened my locker and saw the decapitated head. I wanted to touch it pretty badly. But I didn't. I slammed my locker and went to class. That day an announcement came on. Students of Hawkins High School, there has been an emergency. Rule number 8 has been broken. The student interacted with the figures and faced a fate worse than death. Before that announcement, we started with 50 students. Before Thanksgiving, it hit a very low total of 13. I remembered the rules and marked how many students died not following a rule. I also put down the numbers of how many survivors of each. Rule number 1, 7 deaths, 0 survivors. Rule number 2, 3 deaths, 4 survivors. Rule number 3, 1 death, 0 survivors. Rule number 4, 3 deaths, 3 survivors. Rule number 5, 8 deaths, 6 survivors. Rule number 6, 5 deaths, 1 survivor. Rule number 7, 0 deaths, 3 missing. 8, 7 deaths, 2 survivors. Those survivors were mutilated to the point they were on life support for the rest of their lives. There were multiple students who broke more than one rule and lived. And some did it and died. I broke one rule. Rule 6. I was looking for some kind of pattern. Something that might be able to tell me what the hell was going on. Why so many of my peers were dying. Then it hit me like a truck. The suicide of a teacher. Possibly. Hey Aaron, what did you see when you broke Rule 2? I asked, hoping for an answer. He turned as white as a jar of mayonnaise. He started to say something but turned back around. He put his hands over his head. Was it that fucking scary? Scary enough that Aaron, a horror enthusiast by the way, was scared shitless from it? He broke down in tears. The teacher comforted him and glared at me. How was I supposed to know how bad it was? I mentioned that, but I was sent to the principal's office. Then I saw him. Bob, the custodian. He looked up and said, "Hey, you know where the 3rd floor is?" I ignored him and kept going forward. I heard a groan and the mop. Once I got to the office, I saw the lights starting to flicker. There was a table nearby with a few boxes underneath. It happened. It was bad. Creatures came down from the ceiling. Creatures I can't put my finger on. Think of a pitch-black entity with huge claws and a mouth. It screeched and tore through the room, ignoring the tables. A few minutes later, it was gone. I heard cries and sobs from the principal's office. I went in there and no head. I turned away and blinked, then turned back. It was back to normal. I encountered 3 rules on my way down. 3. He was there, crying. Blood was everywhere. The vice principal's head lay there, on the ground, nothing else in sight. His eyes open in terror, his mouth shocked. He looked up, saw me, and cleared up. I can see his urge to cry again. "What happened?" he said, voice breaking. I asked a friend what happened when you broke Rule 2, and the teacher made me come here. I didn't know it would be that bad. I responded, still confused. He handed me a note. "Meet me here at midnight sharp. No earlier, no later. Set your phone alarm. The minute it vibrates, yell out, 'I'm here.' I will be there. That is how I will know it is you." I nodded and left. When I got back, 2 students were missing. There were 2 more deaths to Rule 6. I remained to be the only person to not hide and live. Aaron was there. He was mortified. A long claw mark set itself upon his chest and his arm. I didn't know a human had that much blood. There is another survivor to 6. The teacher knew the look on my face. A look that said, "I know what happened, but what the fuck happened?" He yelled, "Get out. Get the hell out of my classroom." Then the Bob guy appeared in the room, the back corner. The teacher said to him, Get this kid out. He caught himself, his face filled with horror. The custodian killed and gutted him faster than some kids can scream. One student died when he tried to intervene. We're all gonna die here, in this hellhole. I asked Aaron, hey, want to escape this shithole? He nodded. Midnight tomorrow. Meet me outside the doors. He responded, I have to escape. I have a plan. At exactly midnight, I met with the principal. 24 hours until I leave. The principal whispered, when you are ready, turn around. Do not scream. That is how people die. I turned and saw the fear of my life. I swear my heart jumped out of my chest. I felt the fear around my entire body. I can feel the fear radiating off of me now. If you want to know, I wish I can describe it. It's not that easy. A humanoid figure, I think. 4 legs with deformed limbs, head stretched out height-wise. 4 eyes, one set on top of the head, and the other at the bottom of the face, eating what looked like a human corpse. 2 small holes for a nose, a mouth filled with hundreds of sharp and long teeth, drool dripping from its mouth, a color that I cannot describe. I blacked out. I woke up later that day with a splitting headache. This was in the principal's office. He said, I had a feeling that would happen. Then I blacked out again. I woke up again later that day sitting in class. The teacher said, why did you do what you did last night? You could have died. Fuck, thought that was a dream. Unfortunately not. The image is now burned in my head. I couldn't try and get the image of that thing out of my head. I needed to get the fuck out of here. That night I packed up my stuff and got out of there. That night at exactly 11 at night, I woke up. My alarm clock was beeping. I had to unplug it and turn it off before someone heard me. I grabbed my shoes and my coat. I didn't need much. Going down the stairs was easy. Rules 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 cannot be broken. The lake is easy to look away from. I won't need the locker. I'm leaving from the front doors. Nobody to see or talk to. No lights. That night I saw Bob the custodian. He was mopping. Get back to your room. Want me to call security? I ignored him. I took a glance at his face. I really wish I didn't. He started transforming into this creature. He got taller and his fingers grew into claws. His arms grew longer. Then he let out a loud screech. I ran as fast as I was able to out of the front doors. Bob hit his head on the door frame and fell. He didn't move or get back up. The time was 11:55. Did 55 minutes really pass that fast? I saw Aaron facing me. He shot his hand up. I ran to him. So what's your plan? He asked. 20-foot tall wire fence. Not electric. It will take a few hours, but we can dig out. I responded, eyeing the shovels near the bike racks. Alright, grab a shovel. How wide should it be? He replied, alert for staff members. I calculated how wide and deep it should be to fit one of us with room to spare. About 2 feet and a foot deep. Anything less and we won't have room. You can get in but not out, I said, being serious. We started digging. I checked my phone. 6:30 a.m. 30 minutes until teachers started arriving. I crawled through and looked back. School looked abandoned. Aaron followed me. The outside looked different than it did when we left. Everything felt more alive. I finally got away. I did it. Aaron was behind me, pumping his fists in the air. We survived. To begin, let me explain what this is. This is a very real phenomenon. It occurs anywhere, will be elaborated in this post, and can happen to anybody. Most often it happens with hunters and hikers. The entire forest will go silent. Animals, weather, wind, bugs, hell, even the river or creeks tempers down. It normally happens when a predator or large animal is close by, a threat. The issue of what that threat is when you find it happening in a place it shouldn't. I grew up near a small town in South Carolina that most of you won't know, even less so my actual area. I'd just as soon say Spartanburg or Columbia. Not many folks even know of Union as it is. I had miles of woods around me, rivers and all. A little hick paradise. I learned hunting at an early age, and exploring and survival was a second nature cause I had an unhealthy infatuation with man versus wild. The first time I encountered dead silence is when a pack of coyotes circled me well in a deer stand. The critters nearby all scurried or flew away. The wind died down too, and the horrid screaming wails of a coyote pack shattered an otherwise peaceful hunt. They moved away after I cracked a few shots off, and luckily the four-wheeler was close by to get the hell out of there. The pack was large enough to drag down a bull that weighed a half-ton later that night, just a mile down the road. I would have been easy prey. The second time was while I was exploring some old ruined houses out near my dad's old stomping ground as a hunter himself. Dead silence came about. A murder of crows that had been arguing fell silent, and I did as well. I couldn't see what it was that had come close by, only hear it moving fast and angrily around and away from the shack I was hidden in. A few nights later, a close family friend found pictures of a cougar on his game camera. It had a stocky buck in its jaws. Likely it was hunting me that day, or pissed I was in its den. I've had it happen to me in graveyards, which stays in my mind after all these years. What, pray tell, makes the uneasy silence of burial grounds even more quiet? Fast forward to my enlistment into the Marine Corps. While going through boot camp, you'll reach BWT, Basic Warrior Training, and do a nighttime land navigation course where you have to find different points using an old radioactive filament compass. While trudging through the marshland, it went from hearing DI's massacre recruits to just my little group and the moonlight reads. Dead silence. Something was close by us and rushed to the water when we threw rocks and a large stick ahead of us. It was a fucking alligator, come to find out. It's easy to see the trails they leave when they drag around. Fast forward through a barrage of boot training stories. I could tell you all, and we end up in Okinawa, now my own stomping grounds. As me and two friends stumbled back to Kinzer from a night out, slamming habu shots in a bar and wolfing down sushi at the conveyor belt restaurants, we turn a corner leading to the closest Lawson's. In the middle of a bustling section of the city, with cars and taxis all around, dead silence. The cars drove off at the green light. Random Japanese people stopped talking. This sparked all three of us to hurry away from there. Never found out the danger there. Didn't want to. I want to say a bad fight broke out somewhere nearby that turned into a stabbing, because we had a brief about it the next week. Maybe the guy was hiding nearby. We'll never know. Point being, don't let memes and edgy shit you read make you scoff at this phenomena. It's a warning from Mother Nature herself to shut up and get aware of your surroundings fast, or hope you can get to safety. Don't be the one to get caught lacking. When you hear of Texas, you might be inclined to think of rural countrysides and cowboys. And outside a large couple cities, you'd be right. I'm here to tell you a story that happened in one of those remote areas that I'll never go back to. Wait. I should first tell you who I am and how this began. My name is Aaron. I'm a geneticist, and I'm from California and spent most of my time studying there. This all started when I was 25. I was getting to the point where people were starting to recognize me and my work in the lab. I then got a call. Hello, Aaron. Would you mind having a meeting tomorrow? Yeah. What time do you want me to be there? Be here by 5 p.m. sharp. I was so excited I thought I was about to get a big opportunity related to my work. Was I right? Well, technically yes, but at what cost? Hello, Aaron. It's a pleasure to meet you. Please sit down. It's a pleasure to meet you as well. Why did you all call me in for a meeting? We have seen your work gradually get better over the years, and we wanted to call you in for an experiment. What type of experiment? Before I tell you anything, sign this NDA, please. Basically, we have an experiment facility in the outskirts of San Antonio, Texas, and we want you to go there and experiment on people. Again, I'll ask, what type of experiment is this? We'll want you to inject certain substances into the test patients. Will it be safe? It's uncertain. This will be our first trial. That's why I asked you that you oversee the NDA to understand what this is not public whatsoever. I apologize, but I think I'll pass, sir. Thank you for giving me this opportunity. The man now hands me a sticky note with the number 2 million. I of course didn't question anything else after that point. I took my cash and signed all the contracts. The saying everything has a price is sadly true. I got prepared to head to Texas in 2 weeks. 3 days later, I was flown from San Diego to a small airport in the middle of nowhere. When I arrived, there was a man in an older pickup waiting outside as I stepped off of the plane. Miss Aaron, I presume. Right this way, please. As we drove, I looked out the windows and attempted small talk, but this man was very short in his responses. After about a 2-hour ride, we pulled onto what looked like a ranch or farm. Again, I'm from the big city, so I'm not sure what you'd call it, but anyways. We drove about another 15 minutes and he pulled over and hopped out. He pulled a keycard out of his neck and pushed it against a large tree. I was very confused, but when I felt a strong vibration slowly going from my feet to my chest, the ground opened up in front of what looked like a ramp going underground. He got back into the truck and drove down it saying, "Welcome to the San Antonio Research Facility." I was amazed at the size of this complex hidden under a field in the middle of nowhere, and as we pulled up to a stop, I was in awe. This man now escorted me to a room. Another man now comes out of one of the rooms to greet me. Hello, Aaron. I've heard great things about you. Thank you very much. Where do we get started? I want you to have a meeting real quick with the people in the room ahead of us. I then walk in to see that I wasn't the only scientist there. 8 other scientists, or doctors, were here as well. 2 of them were geneticists like me. 3 other ones were neurologists, and 2 of them were regular doctors. We all greeted each other and got to know one another. After a good 30 minutes of talking, the same man that led me into this room now puts a file on the table and asks us to oversee it. The file explains the goal of this project and each of our roles. The goal of the project is to inject a modified version of LSD into the patients to see what will happen. My role was to check the patient's genetics after the project. The neurologist's role was to monitor the brain, and the doctors were there to just inject the substance and make sure the patients are unharmed. We all then got our equipment ready and waited for commands to head to the room where we would see the experiment. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Please follow. We were then led to a room with a glass window separating all of us and the patients. The patients are now called in, and this sight still haunts me and fills me with anger to this day. Walking into the room were children. Goddamn children. What kind of fucked up shit was this? I turned to look to all of my associates with shocked faces as well. You ever see those pictures posted at Walmart saying missing kid? Well, guess what? Most of them are probably abducted by the government for experiments like this. The 2 doctors now walk into the room injecting the 3 children with the substance. We then waited for a good 30 minutes until we noticed changes in the way they spoke to each other. Instead of regular common use English, they started to use a modified and more efficient version of it. Or at least, that's what we think it was. At the hour marker, we started to see changes in the color of their eyes. All of them had brown eyes, but now it seemed to be turning gray. This experiment was only going to last 13 hours, but at the rates it already reached, I was haunted of what other things may lie dormant. Hour 2. The neurologist concluded that the substance is causing a resetting of the brain, but now one of the children mutters the word safe. We were all left in puzzlement of what that was supposed to mean. Hour 3. One of the children, Cindy, starts portraying strange behavior. She starts off by staring at her hands and moving them in unnatural movement. At this point, I was really starting to question what type of modification was taking place in that LSD, because in my teen years I've tried it, and what was being displayed with these children was not even close to what happens. Safe, Cindy said. Cindy, is everything alright in there? One of the doctors speaking through the speaker. She goes on to repeat this word for a straight 30 minutes until she decided to scream it out loud, eventually losing the ability to speak. The doctors at this point had enough and attempted to open the door up and grab the children. But as soon as they tried, many guards came in and grabbed both of them. Something was strange, though. Cindy was the only child showing odd behavior. Rick and Gabriel just stood there almost completely fixated on the wall. I assumed they were amazed of what was appearing on the wall, because from experience, anything on LSD can look unnaturally intriguing. But this was something modified, so I had no clue of what to think. All I could do was just assume from past experience. Hour 5. Gabriel suddenly gets up and speaks to Rick with their new version of English. After the sentence was muttered out of Gabriel's mouth, him and Rick pick up Cindy and completely beat her up. At this point, all of us had had enough of this, and we all wanted out. But the man reminds us that if we break a contract, certain things can happen to us. And if they were crazy enough to do shit like this, they could certainly get rid of us. So, through fear, we continued. After a good 5 minutes of them beating up on Cindy, they both in sync said safe. At this point, I had come down to 2 conclusions. Either this drug caused them to believe in a structured religion they created, or they just outright lost their minds. Well, you could say there's the same thing, but I hope you understand that this wasn't easy to decipher. June, what do you see on their brain scans? Basically the same thing from hour 2. What seems to be a brain resetting. Hour 6. They are speaking in a language that hardly sounds English. After a good 30 minutes, both of the boys pick up Cindy's beaten up body and now start to attempt to crack open her skull. At this moment, everyone in the room had to find something to vomit in. After a short period, they were successful in grabbing her brain out. Both of them now seem to be studying every aspect of the brain. Maybe they were able to see things we couldn't. After 10 minutes, they looked at each other and nodded in agreement. They both started breaking bits and pieces of her brain apart. They now both took a handful of the brain parts and ate them. Now this wasn't making them the typical zombie, but it was certainly giving them a cannibalistic trait. A brief moment later, one of the neurologists yells out, "Hey everyone, come check this out. The brain scan shows an abnormality accruing in the brain. After they ingested those brain parts, there was a spike of neuron chemistry in the brain." So you're basically saying through eating Cindy's brain they were able to gain more neurons. I'm not saying. That's exactly what happened. Hour 7. The boys continue to speak to each other in the unknown language. Rick now walks up to the window. Even though he couldn't see us, he knew we could see him. He then gives us this eerie grin. With his gray eyes staring deep into all of our souls, he then says, "Safe." Gabriel now seems to be in pain. He yells out in excruciating agony, but from what the neurologist said, there seemed to not be any sort of physical pain produced from this substance. So if anything, Gabriel was yelling in a mental frustration of some sort. Hour 8. Gabriel and Rick sit in front of each other and stare at each other with the complete concentration. They both, after a while, started to laugh. But this laugh wasn't anything natural. It was completely not human in any way. I assumed that whatever this shit was, it gave them the ability to use telepathy. So one main thing all of us understood was that the main thing this substance caused was language adaptations. Hour 9. Gabriel gets up and starts to get frustrated. Rick tries to help him, but Gabriel, outraged, and started to attack Rick. Both of them fight for at least 30 minutes straight before exhausting to the point where they couldn't physically get up. But once every couple of minutes of rest, they continued to go at it. Towards the end of the hour, they had gained somewhat of a mutual acceptance that something else was more important. Or at least that's what it seemed like. Hour 10. Out of the blue, Rick starts to speak regular English. "Can you please send in a doctor? I don't feel so well." We all know better to even send a fly into that room. It was clearly a trap we weren't gonna play into. After we had refused, Rick dips his fingers into Cindy's blood and writes "safe" on the wall. While all of this was happening, Gabriel never took his eyes off the window. He knew we were behind. Hour 11. Gabriel stands up to get Cindy's body and slams it into the window. He continues this for 30 minutes. All of us turned the other way and covered our ears. We all likely were, saying to ourselves, what have we gotten ourselves into? Rick then laughs loudly in an unnatural way until he broke his vocal cords like Cindy had at first when she continually screamed "safe." After Gabriel had grown tired, he started to look at Rick with desperation. Hour 12. Rick started to touch the wall in a very peculiar way. He kept on muttering "safe" as he touched the walls. Gabriel then creeps up behind Rick and chokes him with every ounce of strength he had, with bloodlust like I've never seen before. He then proceeded to break his skull open and eat certain parts of the brain. Like before, he again gained more neurons in his brain. Hour 13. Gabriel has never once kept his eyes away from the window. He gave us this stare as if he wanted us to experience the worst pain imaginable. The man who seemed to be in charge of this experiment then walks in. He goes up to the speaker and says, "Gabriel, why have you done all of this?" After a brief pause of him trying to remember the ancient language English he once used, he responded, "Because I'm safe now, and I lust with every soul in my body to make all of you behind that window safe." The man now makes a command into his phone, and shortly after, guards open up the door and shoot the boy with darts. This is where I came in. I was forced to examine his body after. What I found out was shocking. Once the substance was injected, it sent a code to all of his genes to redirect a certain way. Still unknown. The neurologist noticed that this substance completely changed his perception of reality. That's likely what caused him to act so inhuman. After we turned all of our reports in, we were told to head back to the room we all first met in. There, all of us looked at each other in complete shock of the events that just transpired. I was the first to speak up. What did we sign up for? I just can't believe they convinced us to do something so horrible. One of the scientists said. The other scientists couldn't even mutter a word. They were completely horrified. The man now walks into the room. "Thank you for y'all's work. You will be shortly escorted out of this facility." Change into a more serious tone. "But just remember this. Everything that happened here today will never be spoken of. And well, let's just say, we have tabs on y'all." After a couple of hours, they finally escorted me into a hotel nearby. That night, I couldn't sleep at all. Matter of fact, till this day, I can barely sleep or socialize with other people. The 2 million wasn't worth it at all. I was now a rich man with a fucked mind. There wasn't a point. What really messes me up is that those were kids, no older than 12 years old, and they had to endure such a horrific experiment. And I played a hand in this. Even if I wasn't aware of the magnitude, I still had a hand in this. I write to you all here to finally let go of this burden that's been weighing me down for the past 2 years, hoping that this may help. Just know this. In the shadows lies nothing but pure evil. There is certainly messed up people out there that will do anything imaginable. Be safe and just know next time you pass by a farm, it might just be a government facility that houses down to the bone evil experiments. I grew up in a little shack of the Jersey Turnpike. Dirt poor. Every day when I was a kid, if I'd go out and play, my grandma told me to watch out for the rabbits. I always confused when she said that. Rabbits aren't anything to worry about, you know? They're little four-legged creatures that eat lettuce and have big floppy ears and fuck a lot. The most harmless thing known to man. Every time I told Grandma that, she just told me I'd know what she meant if I saw them, and that the rabbits had taken my mother and killed my father. It took decades before I believed her. See, I thought I just had to live with her as a kid because my parents had just sort of vanished. Every time it came up, she blamed the rabbits. But then I got out of high school, grew up, and started working a sewer tech job over in Newark. Shitty job, as you can imagine. Quite literally a shitty job. Lots of human shit, lots of animal shit swept down the storm drains by rainwater. Generally too much shit. I got very tired of breaking up turds to unclog pipes very fast. One day, boss sends me and my buddy, this other tech named Marco, down some fucked up looking manhole over in Ironbound, next to the Pizza Hut off Jabes. And we saw it. A hole in the wall of the sewer, the size of a pretty large person, with the ground around it covered in blood and gigantic mounds of rabbit shit. My buddy wanted to check it out. I remembered what my grandma said. Fuck no, I'm not going in there, I told Marco. Marco looked at me. Fuck you afraid of? Stop being such a baby. Marco responded as he walked through the hole in the wall. I just stood there, waiting to see what was going to happen to him. When he started screaming for help, I knew better than to bother. I bolted the hell up that ladder and closed the manhole, praying to any higher power that might exist that the rabbits weren't going to be strong enough to open it from the inside. I felt something banging hard against the manhole cover, as if being thrown at it with great force. Then I heard crunching and chewing, and the screaming stopped. I ran like hell and went home. Didn't even clock out on my shift. Next day, the police showed up at my door, asking me what the hell happened to Marco. And honestly, I almost wish I'd have just taken credit for it. No, my dumbass told them the cold, honest truth. As far as I was aware, he was eaten by sewer rabbits. They thought I was messing with them, but I didn't crack. I told them about my grandma, about the gigantic hole in the sewer with the piles of rabbit shit all over the ground. That's when they went from thinking I was joking to thinking I was crazy. Next thing I know, 3 of them were bringing me back to that same manhole cover, this time in cuffs and a jail jumpsuit. I told them how bad of an idea this was and they just laughed. When they opened it and went down, they weren't laughing. They had found Marco. The banging I had heard was something much stronger than a human, throwing him at the manhole cover until his spine shattered. Once he was immobilized, something had started feasting on him, even eating his bones and teeth, until the one thing keeping him recognizable was the little name tag on his tattered jumpsuit. They saw the hutch, complete with the gigantic mounds of rabbit shit. They brought me down, kicking and screaming to verify that this was what I was talking about. I could tell that they were scared shitless too. They had their guns out, pointing flashlights and laser sights in varying directions, looking for something, anything to shoot at. After a few moments of discussion, they collectively agreed to go into the hutch. Despite how stupid of an idea I knew this to be, I was boxed in and handcuffed, so I followed them. The first thing I noticed was the smell. You could smell through the whole sewer. Rabbit shit, blood, pus, and placenta combined. However, in its own absolute nightmare of a smell, I wished I had peppermint oil, like they used to use in the hospitals. The second thing I noticed was that once the rabbit turds had given way, we were essentially walking on a floor made from mangled, chewed up human corpses. When one of the officers noticed this, he nearly vomited at the sight. The third thing I noticed was a gargantuan rabbit, roughly 6 feet tall, hunched down, slamming into one of the 3 officers full force and tearing his lower jaw off using its teeth. The officer made a horrible noise from his mangled face as the rabbit began to devour him alive, and another one, with a shotgun, pumped 2 shells into the creature, wounding it and making it screech in pain as it ran away. The one with the shotgun undid my cuffs and reported in that I wasn't their guy, and they needed backup now. The dispatcher asked him why. Because of the fucking rabbits. The other living officer said. The dispatcher burst out laughing. I'm sending animal control. The dispatcher started to say. We have an officer down. The initial officer, with the shotgun, said. We need SWAT backup. This has to be a prank. I'm not sending a SWAT team for fucking rabbits. The dispatcher staticked over the radio and then cut out. I ran like hell. I still don't know what happened to those cops. You ask me, I don't really care. A few days later, though, I saw one of the rabbits trying to break out of a manhole, slowly squeezing its massive body through the opening to hunt for prey. So I'm going to take a wild guess that they didn't win that fight. But I'm a free man, and I know that my grandma never lied about the rabbits. On an early spring Saturday morning with having nothing else to do, I took my wife and daughter on a drive up to the Poconos to do nothing more than some sightseeing. My daughter Grace, who is 12 years old, really hated the idea and thought it was pointless, but nonetheless she was bribed with being able to play with her phone for countless hours, and the less popular idea of us just spending time together as a family. I worked at the Cold Springs Lodge Resort in the 1990s in the Poconos before it became a casino, and when I worked there, it was definitely on its last leg. With spring in the air, we started the 2-hour trek from Philadelphia to the Poconos with light rain in the Philadelphia region. As the trip progressed, the rain clouds got darker and darker, and I thought about turning around and going back home towards Philadelphia, but we made it so far on the turnpike already that it seemed pointless to turn around at this point. The heavy rain made it really difficult to see, but the constant barrage of thunder and lightning made it even more terrifying for the 3 of us to the point where I had to pull over several times on the side of the road. It was just one of those once-in-a-lifetime types of storms, which was somewhere in between a tornado and a hurricane. What was supposed to take us about 2 hours to get to the Poconos took us close to 5 with the heavy storms. But once we reached the Cold Springs Lodge Resort, there were no clouds and just the sun was out. It was really odd because it seemed like not a single drop of rain had hit the resort. Of course, none of us had cell phone reception, which wasn't overly surprising considering we were in the mountains. But I was just completely shocked that the resort looked exactly the same as it did in the 1990s as we pulled into the parking lot. Prior to taking this trip, I looked online and saw picture after picture of how the resort was supposedly torn down and rebuilt, but I'm looking at the same resort that I worked at in the 1990s. In its heyday, this resort would get all the big-name celebrities like Rodney Dangerfield, and television advertisements would run hundreds of miles away, as far up as Canada. So the 3 of us got out of the car, and we headed towards the resort. I automatically got a sense of nostalgia of just walking from the parking lot to the main building. I pictured myself as that awkward teenager who would make alcohol deliveries around the fledgling bars that were scattered around the resort. I tried to point things out to my daughter Grace, and she was really bored, and she just wanted to go home. My wife Allison seemed much more interested because she always heard of the resort, but she never saw it with her own eyes. As we continued to walk around, one thing became perfectly clear, in that I haven't stepped foot in this resort in over 20 years, and not a single thing has changed. Maybe everything I had read online was wrong, and those were just future plans, because this place looks just as run down today as it did in the 1990s, and there couldn't have been more than a handful of guests staying here right now. Our intentions were just to stay for a couple of hours and drive back home. The car ride was really exhausting, fighting through the heavy rain, so I found a table outside near the spacious pool area on this unreasonably warm day, and Allison and Grace went to buy ice cream. I just wanted to close my eyes for a couple of minutes, and as I attempted to do so, it seemed like I quickly went into a dreamlike state because I started to have a vision of myself making a beer keg delivery. The only problem was that when I completely opened my eyes, I still had the same vision of myself on the opposite side of the pool, slowly delivering a keg of beer on a hand-push dolly. At about the same time, Allison and Grace returned, and I focused their attention on the young man that looked exactly like me. I said to Allison, "That kid over there looks a lot like me." Allison responded, "Yeah, he has that same bad postured walk you have as well." I then say, "Something really strange is going on here. For one thing, there was no way this resort could have continued to operate in this condition for an additional 20 plus years. And now I see someone who is an exact replica of myself when I worked here. Something is definitely not right." Grace is totally disinterested in anything that we're talking about, and I'm not sure what to do. I start to go over everything in my head to when we first pulled into the parking lot, and there wasn't one single modern SUV, and not one car that looked like it was built in the 2000s. So I look over at Allison and I say, "What do we do?" She says, "Why don't you go talk to him?" I respond, "That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. Just imagine how that will change things forever if I went over and said a single word to him. Haven't you heard of the butterfly effect?" Allison then says, "Should I go over and say something?" I respond, "I think that will be equally as devastating. I think his brain will store an image of you, and years later that might have devastating effects on our marriage." We then both look over at Grace as she is completely oblivious to what we are talking about as she eats the mint chocolate chip ice cream out of a cup. Allison says, "Don't you think it would be awesome if I could get a picture of Grace and your old self?" I ponder that thought and think to myself, with the billions of people on this planet, just about everything has been done. But I've never seen a photo of a 12-year-old girl and her 19-year-old father. I took a few moments to ponder that thought, knowing my old self would be back the same way by the pool after delivering the keg. So I said to Allison, "Okay, I guess we'll have Grace ask him a quick harmless question like, where are the bathrooms located? And take a quick photo of the two of them from a distance, and he'll not have enough time to process everything." I then lowered my voice and leaned over to Allison and said, "Grace has no idea of what we're talking about, so she won't even think that she's actually talking to the younger version of me. And the younger me will be in my own little world to realize the resemblance of Grace to himself." So as the younger version of myself came strolling back, and I said to Grace, "Hey honey, can you ask that guy where the bathrooms are located?" I could tell she really didn't want to be bothered with anything, but with an attitude she got herself up and said, "Fine." I couldn't help but notice that since a newborn, Grace has always looked more like me than Allison, so much so that it used to drive Allison jealously crazy. Grace walked with a quicker gait, knowing she needed to catch up with the younger version of me, which she eventually did, and Allison got a little closer with her iPhone in her hand. I could hear Grace utter, "Excuse me," in her almost teen voice. Then my old self looked into her eyes and Grace said, "Do you know where the bathrooms are located?" My old self continued to look at her for a few moments, and at this point I'm focused on him because I'm putting myself back in time, thinking what he must be thinking. My old self points in the direction to where the bathrooms are located, and amazingly, I can faintly hear my voice from a distance say, "Over there by the elevators." Then Grace and the younger version of myself part ways, and both Allison and I smile in glee. I felt we had our once-in-a-trillion-year experience, and we might as well just quit now and head back home. So we headed back towards the car, where Grace was totally oblivious to everything, and Allison was excited, but her lack of sleep had caught up to her, and she looked exhausted. On the car ride home, Allison and I were going through the million different scenarios of what we stumbled upon in the Poconos, and how we were able to see my old 19-year-old self. She even texted me the photo she took of Grace and my old self. About halfway back home, understandably, Allison had passed out, and Grace was in the back seat listening to music with her headphones on. I was plastered to the road, thinking through different scenarios like somehow that storm rerouted us to a different time zone or dimension, or maybe something else. As I saw the sign for the next rest stop, I broke out of my trance and looked over at Allison and said, "Holy shit," when I realized that she just vanished. I then quickly looked in the back seat, and the same was true for Grace, and my first thought was that they must have fallen out of the car somehow. So I quickly pulled over on the turnpike and got out of the car. I looked back over the road to see if I could see them on the side of the road or something, and then I realized that my 2018 green Honda Accord is now a 2002 Ford Silver Escort, where the interior of this Escort has no personal effects of Grace or Allison in it. It didn't take long for me to realize that somehow I messed with my old self's head just enough that I now have a different car and Grace and Allison are gone. So I eventually continued to drive back home to where I discovered that I didn't purchase that house and actually a different family was living there now. Fortunately, I have the same email address from when I was 19 years old, and I was able to find the one-room efficiency apartment that I currently rent out. I also learned that I still work in a bar-like atmosphere, as I did when I was 19 years old. So for whatever reason, I never really advanced in life. All I really have now are my faded memories of the house I once owned with Allison, my wife, and Grace, my daughter, in addition to the picture on my phone of my daughter who never existed with my 19-year-old self.